John Deacon was, by all accounts, not an easy man to like. As well as having a tongue like a rasp file, he was a notorious miser and leech. Francis Bacon's description offers some insight as to why. "A very amusing man," he said, "very sarcastic, but he needed the drink more than anything else." Deacon was a chronic alcoholic, and he haunted the pubs of Soho, London in the 50s and 60s. Descriptions of Deacon are not kind. He had the gait of a midget wrestler, Mickey Mouse ears, and his pockmarked face was wrinkled like a bloodhound's. Like Cinderella and the Ugly Sisters at the same time was Lucian Freud's memory of him. George Melly called him a vicious little drunk of such inventive malice and implacable bitchiness that it's surprising he didn't choke on his own venom. Woolworth's heiress Barbara Hutton described him as the second nastiest man I've ever met. Loved and loathed in equal measure, Deacon was a legendary member of Soho's bohemian crowd of artists and misfits. Soho had always been a bit different. Since the 18th century, it has been home to intellectuals, immigrants, and outsiders, and was known for its unusual mix of ideas, languages, and sexuality. By the mid-20th century, however, Soho could claim to be one of the bohemian capitals of Europe, rivaled only by the left bank of Paris. Born in Bootle in 1912, near the leper colony, he was fond of saying. Deacon learned to use a camera in Paris in his early 20s, and was assigned to an army photographic unit during the war. On his return he washed up in Soho, where he quickly became a fixture. There he spent most of his career as an ex-Vogue photographer. It was a testament to both his talent and his total unreliability that he was sacked from the magazine not just once, but twice, for losing his equipment. Legend has it that he pawned it to fund his drinking. Nevertheless, he enjoyed a certain louche glamour as an ex-Vogue photographer for the rest of his life. Until recently, John Deacon has been missing from photographic history. He didn't seem to recognize his own talent for it. Indeed, in his final years concentrated on painting, of which talent was obviously lacking, and banished his photos and negatives to a box which was unceremoniously hidden under his bed. His career began with Vogue, but, despite achieving recognition for the photographs he took there, he never enjoyed the assignments given and never expected his own work to make him a living. In the early 1950s, he began a relationship with art bookseller David Archer, and, through him, joined the loose association of artists that gathered at the Colony Room, the famous club run by Muriel Belcher. The place owed its success partly to her genius for atmosphere, and partly to licensing laws that required the French House, a rival bar, to close its doors between 2:30 p.m. and 6:30 p.m. For a generation of bohemians, for whom drinking was as important as their art, this was too much to bear. One of the Colony Room's very few rules was that art could not be discussed there under any circumstances. There's nothing more boring if you're an artist than hearing another sozzled peintre droning on about their soul-inspired daubings. Membership, which could be granted or revoked on the spot, was predicated on the capacity to tolerate Belcher's trademark combination of high camp and extreme viciousness. Men of late middle age were referred to using the feminine pronoun, as in, "She's not a very pretty lady, is she?" and "cunty" was deployed as a term of endearment. These verbal cannonballs acted as both a deterrent for the respectable and a signal that ordinary social mores did not apply. Even so, Deacon managed to get himself regularly barred.
Presided over by Muriel Belcher, famed equally for a kind heart and a barbed wit, this club is only open during normal pub hours. Drink is far more expensive than in any of dozens of comfortable public houses within a few hundred yards, yet, against all reason, business booms. Into this dark and smoky womb climb many of the most successful artists, writers and musicians of the day. A few nonentities get in too.
The subjects of his photographs, many taken with his Vogue equipment on the streets of Soho, on drunken afternoons between the Colony and the French House, read as a roll call of the major artists and critics of the time: Dylan Thomas, Lucian Freud, Kingsley Amis, Kenneth Tynan, Elizabeth Smart, and the brothers Bernard, journalist Geoffrey, poet Oliver, and critic Bruce. As a street photographer, Deacon's disreputable character was his greatest asset. His images of working people and strangers in pubs have an aura of familiarity between photographer and subject. These people were Deacon's close friends and acquaintances, and he became effectively their court photographer. Because they knew him so well, his portraits of them have a pitiless honesty and a candour that no photographer on assignment could achieve. When the person behind the camera that is pointing at you is a regular face and fellow boozer, then the subjects let their guard down. Being fatally drawn to the human race, What I want to do when I photograph it is to make a revelation about it, so my sitters turn into my victims. But what I would like to add, that it is only those with a demon whose faces lend themselves to be victimized at all. John Deacon in an unpublished manuscript. Deacon used a Rolleiflex, a camera which he held at naval height. His negatives were then blown up to expose every pore and follicle. Deacon's reluctance to flatter his sitters, another characteristic he shared with Francis Bacon, could sometimes morph into a perhaps deliberate attempt to undermine them. He admitted as much in his image of the poet George Barker. I do not share his idea of his own looks, as this picture perhaps shows. I stood him up against the biggest lavatory wall in London and shot it. He seemed delighted with it. Bacon's partner, George Dyer, is also cruelly victimized by Deacon's lens. Although never more than a petty criminal, he's dressed in the costume of a successful gangster, purchased for him by his lover. Despite his obvious talent, Deacon didn't value photography very highly. Much of his work only survived because the negatives were rescued from under his bed by Bruce Bernard. He really set his heart on being a painter, so disgusted was he by what he saw as his failure in the field of photography. But his oils of flowers and sailors have a surprisingly naive style. Moving in the circles he did, to produce any painting at all must have taken some courage, and the critical and commercial failure of these works must have destroyed his self-esteem even more. Apart from his Soho portraits, Deacon's other claim to fame is as a street photographer, and there were 2 small exhibitions in his lifetime of his photographs of Paris and Rome, the cities he loved most after London. What distinguishes a great street photograph from a piece of photojournalism is a rare combination of the snapshot's frozen in time snatched moment and the knowing, evaluating eye. Cartier-Bresson was brilliant at capturing this blend of the split-second mechanical movement, coupled with artistic instinct. Deacon, who also painted all his life, and would have swapped all of his photographs to achieve one memorable painting, managed something similar in his best photography. Groundbreaking at that time, Deacon's creative eye led him to subjects that are now routine for edgy street photographers. Deacon was taking photographs of graffiti, street signs, advertisements and shop fronts way back at a time when such a notion was unheard of. These photographs are less well known than his Soho portraits, but they possess a timelessness that his portraits fail to capture. They are almost like abstract paintings. Over the years, Deacon took the occasional self-portrait. They show the steady damage and aging caused by his heavy drinking. The pasty, sagging facial skin, the eyes bleary and unfocused. He was frequently admitted to hospital after he entered his 50s. In 1972, Deacon was diagnosed with lung cancer and underwent an operation to have it removed. While recuperating, he died of a heart attack while staying in the Old Ship Hotel, Brighton. In hospital, he had named Bacon as his next of kin, forcing the painter to identify the body. "It was the last dirty trick he played on me," Bacon remarked. After Deacon's death, his photographic archive was discovered covered in dust under his bed, much damaged even before being stored in the box. It's something of a miracle that his work has been preserved, as he obviously thought his oeuvre was worthless, and took no pains to protect this very important body of work. As is the case in the lives of many artists, the greatest surprise is reserved for posterity. Deacon would be frankly astonished at the renown his photography has achieved. The final word goes to Deacon. "The only complaints I've ever had from my victims have been from the bad ones, the veinies, the meanies."
I just love you to bits, Mr. Bellamy.
Grief has a way of blurring the line between devotion and obsession. When one young man refuses to accept the loss of the woman he loves, he embarks on a journey that leads far beyond the boundaries of reason, and into a darkness from which there may be no return. They say that true love can survive anything, time, distance, even death. But there comes a point where devotion ceases to be love and becomes something altogether darker. This presentation explores that fragile boundary where grief whispers impossible hopes and one man chooses to listen.
It won't be long now, Belinda. I feel you closer than ever.
Well, I do hope you enjoyed that presentation, and let me know what you thought about poor old John Deacon. There are actually a few other characters that were hovering around Soho at different eras that I would think of covering if I received enough response from my viewers as to whether they would like me to cover these other subjects, but I think they're quite interesting. There is one today which I will just at the end chat here cover, just to talk about her, because I don't think there's enough for a whole documentary. Perhaps there is, but I'm not going to do that today. Yeah, poor John. Poor John. Must have been a bit galling to see Francis Bacon, just rolling in money from his art, and poor old John couldn't scrape together 2 farthings for his photography, which was not really held in esteem back then. Photography didn't have the respect that it does nowadays. Nowadays photography sells for high amounts. It really is recognized. Back then it wasn't so much so, even though that John was so ahead of his time. It's really annoying how the fates can put you in the wrong era. I'm sure if he had been born a few decades ago, it might have been a different story. But it must have been galling for him to see that Francis Bacon was making so much money, and he just wasn't making any from his art. I have to say, Francis Bacon's paintings don't do anything for me. I wouldn't pay 2 farthings for them, but obviously everyone has different tastes, and many people believe that he was a genius, so who am I to say? But I know what I like, and that's not it. I wouldn't hang them on my wall, but lucky him. Lucky him to be able to enjoy all that wealth during his lifetime. Not that many artists have enjoyed that. Yeah, this photo on the screen, that's Francis Bacon with George Dyer. I think that was 1965 on the Orient Express. Only about 6 years later, George Dyer committed suicide in a Paris hotel room at the age of 36 because Francis Bacon was trying to split up with him gently, trying to, sort of buy him off. He offered him an apartment of his own and various other things, but George Dyer wasn't getting the message because he was absolutely devoted to Francis Bacon and he just couldn't bear not to be with him. It's really actually very tragic, and Bacon afterwards felt guilty. He felt responsible that he had invited Dyer over to Paris for the exhibition. I think he felt sorry for him, but he was too busy organizing the exhibition and basically ignored Dyer, which probably made Dyer feel really unwanted, and then he killed himself, and Bacon afterwards felt very guilty, felt responsible for that. John's death was tragic too. To really think that your work, your life's work, was worthless in your own mind, you think it's worthless, but he was obviously inspired to do it at that time, and it was so original at that time. It's very sort of sad that he thought his photography was worthless and was desperately trying to emulate Bacon by doing these paintings, also trying to achieve some level of success and just not getting there. I hope he can see now that his photography has really taken off and people are starting to recognize what a genius he was. But he didn't get to enjoy the fame or the wealth in his life, which is very sad. But apparently Francis Bacon, one thing I will say about him, I don't really think much of his art, but apparently he was very generous with the people in the area who were not so well off. John Deacon being one of them, he always gave them money. He always made sure they were provided for, helped them out. That's one thing. He was a very generous soul. I'll definitely give him that. So the next character we're going to look at briefly was also a recipient of Francis Bacon's kindness. And let's go and have a look at her now. Actually, just before we go there, I just wanted to quickly talk about the Colony Room. This is from the Londonist.com. This is a blog by Will Noble called Debauched Stories from Behind the Doors of the Colony Room. Here we have Peter O'Toole serving himself a drink or several behind the bar of the Colony Club. I think it would have been fun when I was young. I'm not sure if I would have tolerated it, at my age now, but I think when I was young it would have been great fun. But after a while, all those old boozy heads and cigarette smoke, becomes a bit of a bore. But I'm sure there was some fun times had there. When you're in that sort of moment and in that era when that energy is happening, then it's fun. I think in the decades following, people were just sort of trying to revive that, and it never really happened. But I guess Muriel really, it was her world. Muriel Belcher with the immortal words, "Hello, cunty." Tracy Emin, yeah, I would like to meet her. I don't want to meet Damien Hirst, but he can send me some money if he wants. It was a place where you could meet Doctor Who, Tom Baker, who played Doctor Who for the English people. They would know him, the Americans may not. He used to frequent that bar all the time. And Francis Bacon, of course. This is about Darryl Caulfield, the artist. He was a 20-year-long regular. He's written about the Colony Room and the time that he enjoyed there and the people he got to meet. Muriel's sidekick was a man called Ian Board, an evil-looking catamite with a name as Dickensian and descriptive as Muriel's. They were a double act, and only a very select few of London's upper-class riffraff earned their approval. Here we have a cartoon done by a regular called Michael Heath. "I knew Francis Bacon. Drink, you bastard. Fuck off." Yeah, I would imagine. I knew Lucian Freud. I would imagine that's how it would have been, just trying to revive that time, which was gone. This is a good one, though. Francis Bacon loved his clothes. One afternoon, Francis walked into the club, annoyed and pulling his collar. "What's wrong, Francis?" "Fucking Harrods. I'm never going back there again." He had attended a special night for select clients and bought a lot of clothes, but when he got home he decided he didn't like any of them. "I bought so many suits and shirts and threw the fucking lot in the dustbin." You'd never seen the club empty so quickly. The next day everyone was up to the club, parading around in their new suits and shirts from Francis's dustbin. There's Muriel Belcher, and with one of the Cray, I think it's Ronnie Cray there. So Francis Bacon was friends with the Cray twins. There were random occasions when you'd encounter someone in the club who was legendarily famous, which could prove disappointing. I remember being pulled onto the lap of a very drunk older man who began to fondle my breasts. It was Trevor Howard. Who's Trevor Howard? I've never been able to enjoy the film Brief Encounter in the same way since. Miss Whiplash. Never heard of her. Never heard of Trevor Howard. Anyhow, so let's go now and quickly discuss a character that also haunted Soho. I've known about her for many years. I've been always tossed up whether to do a documentary about her. I'm not sure whether it would be that exciting, so we can have a look anyway today, briefly at that. This is from JimCarrollsBlog.com. This is by Jim Carroll, and it's about Nina Hamnet, the Queen of Bohemia. What lies beneath? So there we have a self-portrait of Nina back in her heyday. For those of you who don't know her, she was a Bohemian artist, really quite famous back in the time. She knew Modigliani. You're not supposed to pronounce the G, I've been told. She knew Modigliani. I know I've pronounced that wrong, and I know I'm going to get hammered by the Modigliani experts. So, she was born of military stock in Tenby, Wales in 1890. Hamnet rebelled against formal education and found a haven in art. She studied at the Pelman Art School and then the London School of Art, earned money as a life model and found a job as a designer at the Bloomsbury-run Omega Workshops. Hamnet embarked on a flamboyant life of clubs and cafes, pubs and parties in London and Paris, cutting a dash in her modernist bob. We all love a bob, don't we? She socialized with Fry and Pound, Modigliani and Picasso. I can't pronounce that name. Diaghilev. I'm sure someone's going to correct me on that. Stein and Cocteau. She sang sea shanties to Guide, danced for Satie, ate caviar with Stravinsky, and took laudanum with the occultist Aleister Crowley. Wow, I didn't know she knew him. She drank prodigiously, had wild affairs with both genders, and jigged nude on a restaurant table in Montparnasse. A lady was the last thing I wanted to be, says Nina. I do like her art, I must say. I do like her art. Apparently Modigliani said she had great boobs, and she often told people that in the pub in her elderly years when she was begging for drinks. She always said that Modigliani said she had great boobs. There you go. I bet that's something you didn't know. Her still lives are quiet, austere and understated. Jugs, cups, notepads and newspapers are carefully assembled on the table. A glass throws a shadow. A book asks to be picked up. These are close-cropped, intense meditations on familiar objects and everyday routines. Anyway, let's get through that. There's a self-portrait. Yeah, I love the colours too, these muted colours. I really do like her work. The dancer and author Lady Constance Stewart Richardson had developed a scandalous reputation for wearing risque costumes. Hammett painted her serious, soberly dressed and pensive. They all flocked to my portrait expecting to see an almost nude woman. They were bitterly disappointed, and Constance and I laughed. Hammett was indeed a hedonist, an icon of the Roaring Twenties, but, as the show reveals, she was also a thoughtful, psychological painter with a penetrating insight into her subjects. Sadly, in her later years, Hamnet spent too much time propping up the bar at the Fitzroy Tavern, and her career went into decline. She died in 1956, having fallen from her bedsit window and been impaled on the railings below. She was 66. Oh. Yeah, there's actually a photo, and I'm going to find it for you, of her sitting in her bedsit for an interview in her elderly years. Apparently, there she is there, which is very bohemian, doesn't she? Apparently she would go round the bars of Soho with a enamel cup, and she would rattle it, and she would put some money, put some money in, dear, and people would put their coins in, and so she could buy a drink. And what she would do, I think it was either 5 or 10 shillings, she would already have these self-addressed envelopes, and she would put this 5 or 10 shillings in as soon as she got that amount, and she would post it to herself so that the next day she would have enough taxi fare to get back to Soho, where she could start her begging rounds again. She was well known around the pubs and clubs, and all the young sailors would buy her drinks and listen to her tell her tales from the past, and all the regulars, of course, knew her and also provided for her drinks. Another person I would have loved to have met, actually, young or old. I think she would have been a fun lady. Well, let me have a look at this photo now of the bedsit, shall we, and quickly talk about that and see if I can remember anything else about Nina. Actually, there's a few photos of Nina in her bedsit. This is from AdrianFlowersArchive.com by AdrianFlowersArchive.com. There we have Nina there, sitting in her bedsit, having a jolly old chuckle with a cigarette in her hand, and look at all the old dusty books and bric-a-brac. So I will leave a link to this site in the description. If I forget, please remind me very quickly so I don't delete the link at some stage. I'm not going to read it all out. But there we are. By the way, Modigliani and Nina were lovers at one time, and she had quite a few lovers, of course, back in those bohemian days. But that is why he was allowed to say that her boobs were great, because they had been intimate. And there we are, she's being interviewed in her bedsit. And I love her. Look at all the old books leaning against each other. Yeah, I mean, it is a bit sad that the drink took over her inspiration, and that was really at the end. She just lived for the drink. Let's make this a little bit bigger, shall we? So you can see it. Yeah, it's a little bit sad. Well, she's still got the tea table set up. You can see a beer bottle there. Yeah, it is a bit sad. But there you go. And there we have her drinking, Nina Hammett and Angela Flowers, in July 1955 at the Bridge House, photographed by Adrian Flowers, courtesy of. There they're having a drinky's poo and discussing Nina's life, no doubt. There is something I wanted to... this is quite bizarre. Angela recalls the visit to the bar as having taken place at Little Venice just north of Paddington Station. The bar was probably in the Bridge House at Delamere Terrace, close to Regent's Canal Bridge, an ironwork structure that appears in a 1947 watercolour by Hammett. In 2019, Kate Thorogood curated an exhibition of Nina Hammett's work at the Fitzrovia Chapel, in the course of which she debunks some mythologies, principally the story that Hammett died in a fall from her flat in Fitzrovia. In fact, Hammett appears to have moved to Paddington some years earlier. It is understood that in 1947 there was a fire in her block of flats from which a girl tried to escape by leaping out of the window, only to be impaled on the railings below. Later, Nina would hear this story being told as if she were the one who tragically died. Having been made homeless by the fire and by all accounts refused a place in Marylebone Workhouse, Nina was rehoused in Paddington, not Fitzrovia. It was here she died, but also from a fall out of a window. There are many versions of the story of her death, including some in which she dies impaled on the railings. Some claim there was a drunken stumble, others a suicide attempt. At the time of the Flowers' visit, Hammett was just 65, but she was destined to live for just one more year. In 1956, several days after the fall, which was probably accidental, she died in hospital. So isn't that quite strange that there had been another story of her dying previously by a fall from a window, and she actually did die from a fall from a window, or of the injuries thereof. So there she is, with a friend there. He must be dossing there for the night, or just coming in for a drink. Maybe he's another lodger. There's one of her paintings up there. And what is this here? So it's also a little sketch. They've got the candle going. Yeah, it looks very cosy. And probably a bit later on she'll be popping down to Soho to try and get some drinks. And there we have her in 1955, a year before her death. Everyone has all these amazing fates. Some might call them tragic, and I guess in a way it is, but it's her story, and hers alone. Well, my dears, on that note, I think I'm off now. I would love to hear your feedback on the stories that you've heard, and thank you as always for joining me. Take care and God bless.